Welcome to the Therapist Thrival Guide. My name is Miranda Barker. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm here with Amber and Gina. Amber, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously my name is Amber. I'm a co-clinical director at LE Mental Health Ann Arbor in Michigan, and I am an LLMSW. So I'm in a very complex spot, but it's an awesome experience.
What does that mean, LLMSW?
Limited License Masters of Social Work.
Got it. Okay. So in our state, is that the same as like an LGSW?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Gina, take it away.
Hi, I'm Gina. I'm at LA, Minnesota at the Mendota Heights location. I've been with LA for 4 years. And I am the director of the embedded and in-home therapy teams.
Awesome. Gina has been on our podcast so many times because
This is like my 5th or 6th.
I was going to say, it has to be.
I'm so excited.
Gina was my clinical supervisor. And so because of that, she feels like she has to say yes to me whenever I ask her to do things. But today we are talking about EMDR, and I knew that this was a topic that Gina would want to talk about.
Yes.
This is probably the most requested topic when I think of people are always messaging me with topic ideas or like putting it in reviews, which if you're listening to this, please rate and review on your podcast platform. But EMDR, it just keeps coming up because I think people are so fascinated by it. And I personally don't know a ton about it. I have had several clients that I have referred over to Gina for EMDR. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited to have this episode and talk a little bit more. So yeah, where do we want to get started? Why don't we just talk about really basics? What does EMDR stand for? What is EMDR?
EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Mm-hmm. It was developed by Francine Shapiro in the 1980s when she realized that there was a connection between bilateral stimulation, and I'll go on to explain that, and processing difficult thoughts and memories. And bilateral stimulation is just sensory experiences on one side of the body and then the other side of the body. That's very simply put. And then EMDR allows a lot of different options for bilateral stimulation depending on the client's preference. So the most traditional and the one that we see, I think, the most in media is the going back and forth like this. Right?
With your fingers.
Mm-hmm. Yep, with your fingers. I know I've seen EMDR on like some television shows, and I've seen it, on some articles and different things like that. And that's when you see the most traditional one. And Amber can speak to the training piece of this. We're doing this in training, right?
Yeah.
Going back and forth. And you're like, how am I going to do this for 10 clients all day long without my arm hurting? So
it almost looks like hypnosis.
Yes.
The way you're doing that.
That's supposed to be the way.
We also did the butterfly hug. So also crossing your arms and tapping left and right on your shoulders, which is a great alternative for, again, when you're on the video screen, sometimes you're not getting the full bilateral. So doing the tapping, you're getting the left, right on virtual sessions.
Yeah. And I think there's even tapping your knees too. My therapist and I see each other over telehealth, and she can't tap for me. So I tap my own knees while I'm doing my own processing, right? And then there's also, I call them buzzies. Amber, I don't know what you call them.
I would say buzzies.
Little handheld plastic devices that vibrate, and you hold one in each hand. OMG, I have a set with me, so I will show them to you. So people don't go, what are you talking about?
That's great, because I was thinking, what are you talking about?
Yeah, you're like science fiction. What are you talking about? Okay. So it's this little handheld device like this.
Yes.
And it plugs in. Listen, this is 12 years old, so I don't want to hear any judgment.
I got the ones where you can do it from your phone. So you can just be sitting there and your client can hold on to them. Yes.
Great. This is a classic.
So for those of you that are listening and not watching the video, it looks like kind of a remote control or like a guitar pedal or something.
Yes.
And do you have two of them and you're holding them in your hands, or how does it work?
So this is the box that controls everything, right? These are the devices that you hold in your hand.
Oh, they look like something that you'd put on your chest to like do clear.
Yeah,
clear,
they're like
or like a heart
little,
monitor.
they're small discs.
Yeah.
And they vibrate. And with this box that Miranda talked about as like a remote, I can control how fast the vibration is and then how intense the vibration is. And then you could also plug in headphones to this and there could be sound. That's the other way we do bilateral stimulation is sound. And I can control the volume of the sound. So if I have somebody that needs 2 ways of bilateral stimulation, like that works best for them, we might do the buzzies, as these are called. And then we also might do sound, and they would wear headphones and the sound would go back and forth. Right?
I've also seen that there are ways that you can do it with lights. Is there like a...
Yes.
How does
There are light bars.
Okay.
Yes. And some people in LA, Minnesota have light bars, and they're really large. They're like sometimes 1 foot to 2 feet to 3 feet long.
Oh, wow.
And they have little tiny Christmas lights in them. And the light will flash quickly from one side to the other. So then nobody has to move their hands. The client can just stare at the lights going back and forth. And again, you can control those like from a remote control with the light bar. The light bar is expensive. It's probably the most expensive option. We're talking like $600 to $1,000 depending on the light bar.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's certainly an option too for somebody who has a heavy caseload of EMDR. A light bar would make a lot of sense.
So there are so many different tools to kind of mimic that bilateral stimulation, but could you explain a little bit more about what the bilateral stimulation is, or like what is going on with our bodies when you're kind of going from left to right?
Yes, absolutely. And Ashley or Amber, please feel free to like interrupt me if I'm getting anything wrong or if you want to add anything. From my understanding of it is when our brain experiences a trauma that overwhelms our brain, we go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? Or fawn, and the memory will break up and get stuck in different parts of our brain, right? So the part of it that wants to tell the story gets stuck in that part of the brain. The part of it that is about the senses, as far as like what we saw, what we smelled, what we felt, those are stored in different parts of the brain. And that's an adaptive way for us to continue to move forward, right? It's a little bit of like compartmentalizing. Is your body's like, well, I can't think about this all at once. It's going to stay stored in these different parts of the brain. And eventually your brain, like any other structure in your body, wants to heal, right? And wants to process and bring those things together. So EMDR is the idea of briefly thinking about the difficult thing that you experienced or went through while also experiencing the bilateral stimulation that we just talked about in its various forms. This allows you to integrate all of the different parts of the memory and the experience into one experience, and allows you also to create a personal narrative about your own function in the memory or the trauma that happened. So what I always like to talk about when I talk about EMDR is I cannot change what happened, right? I am not going in there and adjusting or changing any memories. What's most important to me is what you believe about yourself related to this trauma. We call that the negative cognition and the positive cognition, right? So that's the language we use to talk about what's the negative belief that developed after this trauma happened to you. And Amber, most commonly, actually, a client who I just saw yesterday was like, well, this is all, I'm helpless, I'm powerless. And she was like, that's all it is. We're just going to end up doing that one 8 times. And I was like, you know what? I want to tell you that's probably the most common negative cognition from everyone is I'm powerless, I'm helpless, I don't have control. And I'm here to process all 18 versions of that, right? Because in life, that happened so much. And so I said, my top 3 are probably I'm powerless. I should have done something. And I wasn't in control or I'm not in control. So those are, this is such a timely thing because I was just talking to my client about that. And I was like, and everybody has versions of those traumas that they get stuck in. And so that's really the piece that I want to talk to people about is that EMDR can change the way you think about yourself through that trauma that you lived through, because that's really the most important piece.
Yeah. And just speaking off of Gina with the bilateral too, a way that I also explain it, because it's a lot of fancy dancy terms, is, in REM sleep, when we're sleeping really heavily, our eyes are darting back and forth in our when we have our eyes closed and stuff. And oftentimes in REM sleep, we're processing things like trauma and stuff like that. A way that I prep clients is sometimes when we do talk about heavy things, I'm just like, hey, just so you know, you might have nightmares about this. You might have dreams about this. You might beat the crap out of a person in your dream. You might get something really clarifying and stuff like that too. And I think that's important in describing EMDR is, again, in REM sleep, your eyes are darting back and forth. So your brain is processing that and using the bilateral of your eyes. And so it might help you, again, brains are weird. When you're sleeping, the whole thing is weird. So again, as you're processing, it might not make complete sense, but you're still processing as you're sleeping. So I think of that as a way of like explaining EMDR of, while you're sleeping, your eyes are darting back and forth, you're processing things. And, like if you beat the crap out of somebody, I've had that dream before with my trauma. What does that mean? I'm trying to get control of this person. I'm trying to feel like I can communicate my needs and my wants and feel powerful. And I think that's also a great way to explain that of like, okay, back to what Gina was saying is, I feel so hopeless. I feel so powerless. I feel lack of control. Okay, so what did your nightmare or your dream say about all that? So I think that's a kind of like a smaller version of explaining all the educational terms.
It's kind of like how your brain is already doing this naturally while you're sleeping. And so you are mimicking that and almost forcing it to start to process some of those things by thinking about it.
Yeah. Amber brought up such a good point about the dreaming thing, because when we're sleeping and we're downloading our day, right? We're processing through everything that happened. Some of it's important. So much of it is not, right? But the stuff that gets stuck, we end up having those dreams over and over and over again about it until we can work through it. And that is so much mimicking the EMDR experience. Not exactly the same, but very, very similar.
Yes. I think sometimes too, like, of course, we have like the cliche of like, maybe go for a walk, undo all the things that you're going on in your day, just get your mind off of stuff. But actually, when you're taking a walk, the left, right of your legs also stimulates the bilateral. So that's why sometimes too, people find taking a walk really healing in addition to all the nature stuff and stuff like that. But
such a good point. Yeah. The walk and talk. When you go for a walk with your friend around the lake and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. It's because you just talked through all these difficult issues and these things, and you're moving your body and doing the bilateral. It is an informal version of EMDR, just like running. Running would also do that. Hiking would also do that. Like I always feel like I, went through a therapy session when I go for a walk with my girlfriend. Or a family member and we talk about tough stuff. I always feel like a lightened load, right? So
that is fascinating. Oh my gosh. I've never connected that before.
Yeah.
So
and kind of again with informal stuff too, if I have a lot of kiddos on my caseload and they don't sit with this tapping, all that stuff. Nope, absolutely not. So I have like a drum, again, left, right. Even passing a ball is great for kids because again, you're getting the stimulation of left, right, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of informal ways that you can actually imitate that the eye movement and the tapping and stuff like that, especially with kiddos who can't sit very still.
And I'm so excited, Amber, that you do EMDR with kids because it's so needed and there's not enough people doing it. And I would say I have tucked those little buzzies in their pockets when they play.
Yeah.
And I tuck those little buzzies in their shoes when we are like running around and they're playing, house with something. Like there are ways to build it in so that they can still be mobile. And, kids are busy. Like they're not going to sit for this, right? So I love that you brought that up, that this is not some place where you just have to sit on a couch and do this. Like this is something that can move with you too. And now they have wireless. A lot of people here, even at our office in Mendota, have wireless buzzies.
Yep,
so you can control it from your phone and they can like be in their pockets or be behind their knees or like wherever they feel good for the person, for the client. That's really what matters.
Yes.
So.
Absolutely.
This is fascinating. So I know enough about EMDR to know that you don't just like dive right into EMDR either. So tell me about like, I'm going to butcher this. I mean, I know that there's somewhat of like a process where you talk about like a safe space and do like, walk me through that. What does this look like when you start EMDR with a client and why is it important to do that?
Amber, you're going to be fresh on all this. So go for it.
Yeah. So again, when we talk about our trauma, well, first and foremost, you're not sitting down with your client, okay, ready, let's go do all these things. You have to get a background, of course, of like, what are we working on? What is some of your trauma? The initial intake session, stuff like that too. And I think that often gets looked over. But as you're preparing for actually doing EMDR, you have to find that safe space. So there's this idea of a container and a safe space. So the container is, I like to think of something that you can put something away and then you don't have to visit it until the next time you're in therapy. I've seen people use mason jars, pirate chest. Mine was SpongeBob's pineapple house, something that you can lock away and like have like a physical, like again, a lock.
It's a physical thing. Wait, so it's a physical thing?
It can be physical. It can be imaginary. With kids, again, I like to do the physical thing because they can keep it and we can write little notes of like, what did we talk about today and stuff it in there. But as for adults, I think, again, for the most part, they could do imaginary, but hey, for all means, you can do a physical one too. Like have a physical mason jar, something that you can close and maybe you can keep it with your therapist for a time being. But it can be imaginary too, of like you're thinking of like this pirate chest or whatever, something that can close and that you can put away. So that's a container part. So again, as you're going through your trauma and stuff, it's hard to leave therapy and leave the stuff at the door. So having that imaginary lock and key or whatever it is helps you focus on, okay, I've said what I said. This is in therapy. It's safe. It's closed. I don't need to worry about it anymore in my day-to-day life. So that's there. As for the safe place, again, our body is going through the fight or flight thing, even as we're introducing our trauma to our therapist and stuff like that. So having a safe space, I think in general with EMDR and all therapy, of having a safe place is very smart. So that can be somewhere that you've experienced before. That can be an imaginary thing. Some people find that it's in nature and stuff like that. Again, somewhere that they visited before, like maybe with Gina, that'd be like a place that she hiked, stuff like that. So that's a way for you to revisit when you're feeling a little bit escalated and stuff like that. Okay, so I recognize my safe place was like a little cabin in the woods with lots and lots of animals. Oh, so soft animals with waterfalls in the back. And that's something that's calming for me. So I know that when I need to visit my safe space, I can visit there, put myself there, feel myself petting all the animals and hearing the waterfall and stuff like that. I think that's also great to have a lot of imagery for that, because that calms me down, calms down my nervous system. So as things open up in trauma and stuff like that, you have these spaces that you can end the session in, that you can put stuff away, feel calm, relax, and carry on about your day.
So you might be like, as a therapist, when you start doing EMDR with a client, I mean, you'll do something like informed consent. You'll talk through like, this is what this process is going to look like. Before we actually start processing, we're going to talk about a container.
Yep.
We're going to talk about a safe place or safe space. And is that like a visualization that you're guiding them through, or something that, or is it just something that you're kind of introducing, and then maybe like the next session you'll start doing EMDR? Like what does the time frame even look like for this?
So there's 8 phases of EMDR. The first session is like pre-phase 1. Like you're not even, I think that's so important. I've heard and had a lot of clients come to me who are like, we just jumped in, we started processing. And I go, what? Why?
No. So let me interrupt you for a second. EMDR is like, it has a very strict protocol. Like you can't can't just be like, we're going to do EMDR this session, and then next session we're going to do some art therapy, or like,
and you have to be a consultant, right? An EMDR consultant, and then become a trainer. And that is a very long process. Yep. You can't just get an EMDR training from anyone. All of that is really held by EMDRIA, which is the international organization that Francine Shapiro was leading until she passed away in 2019. And they continue to have rigid guidelines about who can practice EMDR, when they can do it, and that you need to keep up on CEUs and trainings to continue to be able to do it successfully and effectively. Miranda, you brought up informed consent. I really want to speak to that for a moment,
Yes.
because something that I always say in my first EMDR, like meeting the client session, is it will get worse before it gets better.
Oh yeah.
This is not you're going to walk out of here and your depression is gone, or you're going to feel like $1 million. This is, we're going to have to trudge through some mud sometimes. I'm going to do my very best to help you to contain it when you leave, so that it doesn't affect other areas of your life. But you can often see a flare up of symptoms, right? Of mental health symptoms. And people who are done after an EMDR session, they are tired. Their brain just ran a marathon in 45 minutes, right? So they're running through all these traumas and thinking about all this stuff. And then we've got to wrap it up and they've got to go back to their life. So it's really important to talk about this. You're not going to feel amazing the second session, the third session. This will take time. And that is a really important of informed consent that I really wanted to make sure that we talked about.
So what happens if a client is starting the EMDR process, they've done some reprocessing, and then they're like, this is too much? Like, can they just end? What happens?
Yeah, everyone's entitled to their own type of modality. It might be, like once we start doing all the tapping and all that stuff, the bilateral, and they might realize too, like it's too much, or it's a little bit like, I don't know. I feel a little bit cringy doing this. I like, yeah. So like they might think that it's not their jam, and that's totally okay. Everyone's entitled to find their modality and find a therapist that they enjoy and that they relate to. So it's totally okay if they, get through some stuff and they're like, yeah, I don't really like this. Okay, we can stop. If you need someone else, like if you're specifically EMDR only, again, transferring and stuff like that. But other than that, they have a client has every right to change whatever they're doing.
And Beretta, that's something, we have a consult group here in Mendota Heights, just because we have so many providers in LA, Minnesota that are EMDR trained. I think we have 24, 25. Wow. So sometimes we all meet together, and a common theme is, we started EMDR and we stopped because the client wants to talk about something else right now. That's really, really, really normal, because we are touching on hard things, right, that have existed for a very long time. And we're trying to switch up the homeostasis that this client has been living in. And that can be very uncomfortable. And so we have lots of clients who are like, this is too much. This isn't the right time. I'd like to take a step back. And I want to honor that. We're never going to make somebody do EMDR, right? We're going to ask, and we're going to come back around. EMDR is not just EMDR therapy, it's talk therapy and other things all mixed up into that. Because, healing is not a straight line.
One thing that's really interesting to me is, and I think Gina, you're the one that told me this, but EMDR does not require a complete retelling of your trauma. Like, they don't need to say it out loud. And I think that some clients really struggle with certain types of therapies that require a complete retelling of their trauma. Why is EMDR different, or what can they do instead of talking about their trauma?
So for some of my clients, I've had such a varied population of adults and kids with such various different traumas that there are some who want to talk and process it out loud. And I'm here for that, right? Actually, sometimes they want to talk and process too much. And they want to switch into their intellectual prefrontal cortex brain. And I go, ooh, you're talking too much. Can you just say a sentence about what you experienced, and then we can go back in, right? Because it makes us more comfortable to like get back into that. I can explain what's happening. I can use words. There's some distance with words from the trauma, but I'm way more interested in how you feel and what's living in your body.
So does that mean, like, going back to a different podcast episode that we've did, where we talked about the whole brain child, does that mean that when you are doing EMDR, you're almost like trying to live within the right side of the brain, like the emotional side, and kind of like not necessarily let the left side into like,
you're trying to
intellectualize?
Yeah. So when you're in the phase that you're about to start reprocessing, and Amber, please, step into with your process. I have this like worksheet that I have in front of me, and I go, okay, so we're going to think about the image that is the most distressing part of the memory. We're going to think about the negative cognition, which is I'm helpless. And then we're going to remember the feeling that you have. which is like chest pressure is honestly probably the most common one that I hear, right?
Yes.
Or a racing heart or sweaty palms or tight muscles. So you're looking to highlight those three things as you go back into the memory, because you need to light up those three parts of the brain. When people get stuck in EMDR and don't know what to say or don't know what to do, I go back to how are you feeling and how does your body feel? Because those are the things we're most separated from, and we feel more comfortable just talking, right?
But when you ask those questions, are you asking about how they felt in that trauma or how they're feeling in this moment in your office?
In this moment, thinking about that trauma. That's
Got
what I'm
it.
asking. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit onto that too, I'm having a brain fart remembering the different types, but there is different types of EMDR. I know one off the top of my head is restricted. Gina, you can interrupt me if you know the types. But there's 3 different types, and that also defines the way that you're going about certain things. There's one of them, again, having a brain fart, that you don't have to talk about your childhood, because another thing that we do in EMDR is we kind of do, I forget what that's called too, but it's a triangle. So we're working from the present to the past. And then we're also dealing with the present right now. So another thing that people are weary of, again, is like, I don't want to talk about my childhood. I don't want to talk about my mom. I don't want to talk about my dad. I don't want to talk about my caregiver. Nope, nothing about that. So there's other ways in EMDR that you can ignore that. Like I think, again, Gina, I might be butchering this too. Restricted doesn't go into the
You're
childhood.
doing great, Amber.
Thank you so much. See, it's fresh in my memory, but then like I forget certain words.
No, she's talking about the AIP, which is which is the AIP model is the adaptive information processing. It's the foundation of EMDR. It's the idea that the memory systems incorporate new memories into old ones as we experience them. And so that's just a part of the framework of EMDR. So
Stop it. So if I'm like thinking about the movie Inside Out and how like they have the memory world, you guys have both watched this movie, right? Okay, thank you. I'm like, okay, I want to make sure.
Therapist. Of course we watch Inside Out.
And where will you be this June when the new episode?
I'll be at the movie theater seeing the second one. Yes, exactly.
But it's like in that movie, they have the memory bank where they have all of the rows of like the memories that are stored. And then every once in a while, they will like have that big hose where they're sucking up the memories to be recycled. It's almost like what you're talking about, where those memories just get recycled into new ones.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And traumatic memories are processed differently, right? Because of the overwhelming effects and the overwhelming trauma that we're experiencing. Our brain is not calm when a trauma happens, right? So it's stored differently. And that AIP model helps us to understand that.
Okay, I just thought of another question when you said that. Can you do EMDR for like pre-verbal traumas?
Yes. Yeah, there is pre-verbal EMDR.
How would that even work?
It can be much more based on feelings and body sensations.
Yes.
And there's a whole pre-verbal protocol that you need to use and have to go through before you would offer that to anybody. But absolutely, yeah, there's pre-verbal.
Interesting. Okay, so is EMDR only good for trauma?
No.
What are some other diagnoses that you would use EMDR for?
All.
Okay, say more, Amber. Say more.
I like anything, honestly, because again, as like I'm thinking about generalized anxiety disorder, everything like I'm scared to do this, I'm nervous about that, are people judging me? Why are you worried about people judging me? Or judging you. So you can break down that thought of where did that come from? Where did that judgment come from? Is it because somebody judged you for how you drank your coffee in a coffee shop, or you believe that they were judging you? Stuff like that, of even the things that minimal, and I'm using quotation marks if you can't see that, but minimal things of, again, you're having this assumption about yourself. Where did that come from and how can we dive into that? So again, generalized anxiety disorder, borderline's another good one. Why are you having these attachments? Where did that come from? What are the thoughts about these things? Anything is great for EMDR.
Yeah, there's attachment-focused EMDR, right, with the idea of early childhood neglect and not getting what you needed from your parents and being able to reparent yourself through EMDR. I've used EMDR with a lovely 7-year-old who struggles with being around people who are sick and a strong fear of vomiting.
Yes.
And she's doing such great work at being able to build that tolerance and being able to stand, I understand that somebody's sick. That doesn't mean that I'm going to get sick or that they're going to throw up. So yes, anything with a belief that isn't serving you can probably be worked on with EMDR.
Yep.
Other parts of EMDR that you like, or that you are like, oh, we haven't talked about this aspect of EMDR yet?
I think it's important to talk about the 8 phases. The main ones that often get talked about are the prep, right? The resourcing, which is the container and the safe place. And then the reprocessing part, which is really like the meat of what we're doing. And then there's also, we do a body check after that, right? Like, where is this stuff living in you? All of these things, what we're talking about as far as the memory, the feeling, and the body sensation, they're all tied together. And then after we do the reprocessing, after we get to a place where you believe the positive cognition, that you have choices and that you have as much control as you do now, we want to make sure that that's firmly planted. And then we also go back and we do future looks to, let's say something comes up or something happens similar to this in the future. And we walk through that with the client of like, okay, first day of school, you're back in the building, and what does it look like now that you have this new positive cognition about yourself? How are you going to go about your day? So all of those phases are important for the full experience and the most effective and the most effectiveness.
How long does EMDR typically take?
That's a good question. I mean, it's really, I don't know. Amber, I'm curious what you would say.
Honestly, the answer to all these things depends on the person. But typically I would say at least like maybe 12 to 15, and that's even being generous. Again, like it doesn't have to be trauma focused, but usually again, people associate EMDR with trauma. And so you're working with this client and you want to make sure that they have enough time to change the negative cognition to a positive cognition. There's also a term, I don't know if Gina, if you mentioned this already, but validity of cognition. So at the end of EMDR, a person should be likely to believe that positive cognition about themselves. So let's say if you're working with the negative cognition of I am not in control, the positive cognition would be I am in control when I can be. You don't want it to be I am in control, because there is some instances where you're not in control, and that's okay too. So I'm in control when I can be. And what we're working on is getting the VOC is the validity of cognition. That's 1 through 7. So by the end of EMDR, we want it to be true, which is a 7. So that person should be ending EMDR. Typically, again, it might not get to a 7, and that's okay too, but we want it to increase over time. So depending on how long that takes too, again, maybe 12 to 15. And again, that's, being generous too, taking your time is key. But we do want to associate that with more truth of, I believe that I can be in control when I can be.
And I've worked with, Miranda, we have Protect Your Overwatch in Minnesota. We serve those that are police officers, firefighters,
first responders,
EMT, first responders, military personnel. And I've worked with a few of them, and single incident traumas with a well-resourced person, they can be done in 5 sessions, right? Yeah. So, but I'm talking single incident, right?
Yeah.
So if there's a bunch of other childhood trauma, or what often happens is a lifetime on a very stressful job where they see trauma after trauma after trauma, that's going to take more time, right? I think the longer you haven't talked about the trauma, or the longer you've experienced it, prolonged chronic trauma, it can take longer. And again, Amber is 100% right. It just depends on the person and the readiness of the person as well. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you're a therapist listening to this, and like they might be asking, how do I get trained in this? Is it something that I need to do like years of work towards being certified before I can start practicing this? Or like, what does this look like?
Amber just went through it, so
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So I did my training through EMDRconsulting.com. And from there, you can do it in the middle of the week or on the weekend, again, depending on your situation, if you're at school or at a job, and depending on if they allow you to take trainings and stuff like that. I did mine on the weekend with George Tab and 100% recommend. But it was a 3-day course. I did completely virtual. I believe you get the option to do it in person as well, but virtual, again, we're the 2020 people who survives all that. So there's many of options. EMDR consulting is the one that I've heard the most, but if you just Google EMDR certification and make sure that you get your CEUs and stuff like that, you can be certified. It does not take years. Right now, again, being that I just finished my trainings, I have a year to get some consultings into that. And after that, I would just have to revisit and talk to the coaches there and stuff like that. But it shouldn't take anything less than a year. And that's if you're being generous with your time.
But you're practicing EMDR now.
Correct.
So it's like you go through the training, you start practicing it. You're kind of doing something similar to supervision is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And then and then at the end of a year, you're like, all right, I can now call myself certified, or what at what point? No,
you have to do a bunch of courses, which again, I'm in a privileged thing because I finished all that. I unfortunately have to wait until I'm fully licensed to get my certification. I don't know if that's for everything. So after you finish your courses that are mandatory, again, I'm going off of what my training was, but there's courses that you need to complete. There's supervision that you need to complete. There's so many hours that you have to also do EMDR too. And after that, and again, you have to be fully licensed. To get your full certification. I might be missing some things, Gina.
No, I think Amber's got it. It usually happens in 2 parts.
Yeah.
So sometimes I haven't ever seen it done all at one time because that would be a ton of information, but usually it's one long weekend of like 24 to 30 CEUs. And then part 2 is 24 to 30 CEUs. We don't want them to be super separated, right? Because otherwise you'll forget the material. Mine, I was working at a lovely nonprofit. So we got to have access to the HAP organization within EMDRIA, which is the humanitarian aid program. So they offer EMDR at about half the price, which was so important for me as like a fresh newbie student. Put it on the credit card and paid off. So that was really important. I wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise, right?
Because how much is it to go do all of this? How much is the training?
I think Amber and I are going to say a range, like anywhere between $1,400 and $1,700 probably. Split between the 2 weekends and hopefully paid in a payment plan. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's ideally
cheaper than somatic experiencing, cheaper than a lot of modalities out there.
Cheaper
and it's actually
IFS, cheaper than, there are, it is, I actually think, more affordable than some of the trainings out there. Absolutely.
Well, and gosh, if you're ending it with so many CEU hours, like that actually, when you think about
for
it,
at least 2 years. Yeah. And then Amber was talking about, after you finish part 1, part 2, they want you to be practicing and working with clients after part 1. And they want to see you again for part 2, and they want you to be doing the work after that. You need 10 hours of group consultation. And they'll set you up with that or advise you or give you options of who you could do the 10 hours with. Once that's done, you can submit that and become certified.
Got it.
So you can be EMDR trained if you completed it. If you want to do certification, you have to go through EMDRIA and send all those materials in and then pay like a yearly fee to continue to be certified, right?
That makes sense.
And then from there, you can become a consultant in training, a consultant, and then a trainer. And there are steps for that along the way. That include even getting like letters of recommendation. And then I think to actually work to being a consultant in training, you have to have like 200 clients and at least a certain amount of hours that you've done EMDR. So it's important to have those gatekeeping, that process along the way, because it needs to be done in a certain way to be effective. There's flexibility, right? Like every person is an individual. And I think clinicians who have been doing it for a long time, they have their own ways, right? Like it all comes back to the bilateral, but they develop their own interesting ways of doing it too that can be very effective. So,
okay, I have a question. So I like for my personal situation, like I don't see a full-time caseload of clients. So I don't know if it would be worth it to actually become certified. Could I just do EMDR training and then like start practicing at that point and not get fully certified? Or is it okay?
Yes.
You don't have like,
Yes.
a certain amount of time where you have to follow all of, okay. That makes sense.
So I've been doing it for 12 years and I'm EMDR trained. I am not certified because I don't necessarily see the cost benefit for becoming certified and paying the fee to be an EMDR member and then doing all of that work. I'd like to be a consultant though, so I'm probably going to do like the steps for that because I want to train eventually. But no, I'm still trained in
super
EMDR.
Helpful to know. Okay.
Yes.
No, that makes sense.
And I feel like, and some people that certification is super important and they feel like you do get put onto like EMDRIA's,
lists and
list
stuff.
of certified therapists, which I think there's a lot of benefit in that too. I went back and forth even with some of our staff here. Do I get certified? Do I not? I mean, you have time, right? You don't have to figure that out right away. Sure. And it wasn't within my budget to do that right after I gotten trained anyway. Yeah. So.
Well, this has been super helpful. Any other last thoughts or things that we feel like we're missing about EMDR? Amber's cat just jumped up to say hi.
Yes. He's here.
Hi, kitty. Any other things that we feel like we're missing on this topic?
I would say again, just money wise too. Being the clinic director at our location in Ann Arbor, Michigan, I have been seeing a lot of people inquiring about EMDR. So I think it is one of the up and coming kind of modalities, kind of the buzzword kind of thing. So that's another thing to consider too, is how are people going to use my EMDR training? Is it worth money wise in the long time too, and experience wise of can I make it? I think of things in an investment. Like, is it an investment to get the certification? Because are people going to be wanting it too? And I definitely do see that taking a role in our society today. Is we're getting a lot of inquiries for EMDR, and unfortunately, we don't have that big of a staff with EMDR certifications or trainings. So I definitely think in the long term it is worth it, especially as that becomes more well known in society today.
That's fascinating. How it's been so interesting to see how clients have become more aware of these modalities and just even being able to, I think that there was in the last few years, the book, The Body Keeps the Score, has gotten so popular, even just with like non-clinicians, with people who are just trying to understand themselves. And that book talks about EMDR. And so a lot of times I've had probably 2 or 3 different clients who have read that book and then come to me and been like, I think EMDR would be really helpful. And so it is interesting how many clients are seeking out specific modalities just because it is becoming more mainstream to know, the type of care you're getting. Yeah.
And always that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. My first session is always, how did you hear about EMDR?
Yeah.
Tell me what you know about EMDR. Like, give me an idea. And it's my sister did it. My best friend did it.
Yeah.
Like, it's very, very much word of mouth. They found it super helpful. It changed their life. Like, that word of mouth piece is huge. And they get to tell them about their experience and what they saw change in their life. And they want that for themselves as well. So I think the one thing that I wanted to say is when I was a fresh newbie and was working with people with lots of trauma, I was like, OMG, how am I going to help them? Right? Like, I had CBT and I had the foundational knowledge of what I learned out of school, but I was like, I'm going to need something else to be effective here. And, I was considering TFCBT. I was considering, brain spotting and ART. There's so many options now and all of them are worthwhile. And EMDR was the one that I was drawn to because I felt like it could help the largest group of people.
Awesome.
And it could be the most accessible and used with adults and kids. And that was hugely important to me. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining, and we'll have to have you back again sometime. I know Amber is going to be joining again soon to have more episodes. Yeah. And then Gina, you always come around.
We'll
so
find another thing to talk about.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.